You know, we've all seen fossils, right? In museums, documentaries, these amazing stone relics from a world long gone. But have you ever stopped to think about what they actually are? Because hiding inside them is this deep chemical puzzle. A puzzle that kind of messes with our basic understanding of life itself. So, let's get into it. Okay, so look at this. On one side, you've got a living, breathing dinosaur. It's an organism built from carbon, just like you, me, and every living thing we know. But on the other side, that's its fossilized skull. And here's the kicker. It's not carbon anymore. It's basically silicon-based stone. So how in the world does the building block of life, carbon, turn into the building block of rock, silicon? That's the huge question we're tackling.
And look, on the surface, that question seems pretty simple, right? Something for a geology textbook. But according to the author we're looking at today, the usual answers just don't hold water. And this whole puzzle, it sets us up for a journey into let's just say, a very unconventional idea about our planet's distant past.
All right, so to really get why this is such a big deal, we need a quick chemistry refresher. We have to go back to the absolute basics, the unbreakable rules that tell us how elements work.
So here's the most important thing you need to remember. You've got two types of reactions. In a chemical reaction, think burning wood, iron rusting, the atoms are just rearranging. They're swapping partners, but the elements themselves stay the same. Carbon is still carbon. But to actually change one element into another, well, for that you need a nuclear reaction. We're talking about changing the very heart of the atom. That's stuff that happens inside a star or a nuclear reactor, not in your backyard compost pile.
And this is the perfect example. Think about the alchemists, right? For centuries, they had this dream of turning cheap lead into precious gold, and they failed every single time. Why? Because they were using chemistry, mixing stuff, heating it up. They were playing by the wrong rule book. What they needed was nuclear physics, something they couldn't even imagine. The point is, chemistry just can't change one element into another, period.
Okay, so keeping those rules in mind, let's bring it back to the world of the living. All life on Earth is basically a story told with carbon. But what happens to all that carbon when something dies?
Right, carbon. It's the superstar of the periodic table for a reason. Its whole deal is that it can form these 4 super strong bonds, which lets it create these incredibly long, complex chains. And those chains, that's everything. That's your DNA, your proteins, your cells. We are, when you get right down to it, just really, really fancy carbon-based machines. So, when a carbon-based life form dies, nature has a very clear, very predictable plan. It's called decomposition. First, the body's own enzymes start breaking down tissues. That's autolysis. Then bacteria get to work producing gas, which causes the body to bloat. After that, things get, messy, with active and advanced decay. And finally, you're left with just the dry skeletal remains.
But here's the thing to remember. Decomposition isn't the end of the story. It's a cycle. You can think of it like nature's ultimate recycling program. All those complex carbon molecules that made up the living thing, they get broken down by bacteria, fungi, all sorts of little critters, and that carbon gets sent right back into the soil and the air, ready to be used again.
And this is the absolute key takeaway from all this. This entire process, from start to finish, is just a bunch of chemical reactions. The carbon gets broken down, it gets recycled, but it never turns into a different element. It's always carbon. It's just following the rules of chemistry we talked about.
Okay, so we've set the ground rules, right? Chemistry recycles elements. It doesn't transmute them. Now let's take that fact and crash it right back into our original mystery, the fossil.
Here it is. This is the central fact from the author that blows everything up. When paleontologists dig up dinosaur bones, or petrified wood, or ancient shells, they are not made of carbon. They are made of silica. They are, for all intents and purposes, stone. The carbon is just gone. And somehow, silicon is there instead.
Now, hold on. The standard scientific explanation for this is something called permineralization. The idea is that minerals from groundwater seep in over millions of years and slowly replace the original organic bits. But the author of our source material just isn't buying it. They basically say, that's not how it works. They argue that this idea completely ignores the natural process we just talked about. A body decomposes. It doesn't just sit there patiently waiting to be replaced molecule by molecule.
So the author really focuses on 2 main problems with the conventional story. First, the whole volcano eruption idea. I mean, come on, lava is thousands of degrees hot. It would just incinerate a body, turn it to ash, and destroy that delicate bone structure instantly.
And second, the idea of a slow chemical substitution, that seems to fly in the face of the super-fast, aggressive process of natural decay. The two just don't seem compatible.
So, if the standard answers don't work, what's left? Well, faced with this puzzle, the author comes up with a solution that is, well, it's radical. It's a fringe idea that basically asks us to throw out everything we think we know about ancient life on this planet. This right here, this is the big twist. The author says, what if we've been asking the completely wrong question this whole time? What if it's not, how did carbon become silicon? What if the carbon was never there to begin with?
To back this up, the author points to this as their Exhibit A. This is Devil's Tower in Wyoming. Now, geologists have a very clear consensus on what this is. They say it's an igneous intrusion, basically the hardened magma core of an ancient volcano that has since eroded away.
But that's not what our author sees, not even close. They look at this exact same formation, and they see something completely different. They see the petrified stump of a gigantic, ancient tree from a time when life itself was based on silicon.
And the scale of this idea is just mind-bending. Based on the proportions of what they see as a stump, the author calculates that the original flint tree would have been over 13 kilometers tall.
And the weight of this one single silicon-based life form, they figure it would have been over 1.5 billion tons. I mean, we were talking about life on a scale that's hard to even comprehend. So why would anyone make such a wild claim? Well, for the author, it all comes down to the structure. They argue that when volcanic lava cools, it just forms a big, shapeless blob. It's amorphous. But Devil's Tower, if you look closely, is made of these really distinct structured columns. And to the author, that looks a lot more like the bundled fibers you'd see in a plant stem.
And here you can see exactly what they're talking about. On the one side, you've got the structured, almost bundled together columns of the tower. On the other, you have a classic example of cooled lava. It's flowing, it's messy, it's amorphous. The author's whole point is that these two things look fundamentally different, and they couldn't have been made by the same process.
So this all leads to the author's grand conclusion. The fossils we've been digging up for centuries aren't carbon-based life that somehow turned into stone. They are the actual, original remains of a completely different kind of life, a primordial, silicon-based world filled with giant plants and animals that once dominated our planet.
And this leaves us with a really fascinating final thought. When a fringe theory like this comes along and presents evidence, like the structure of Devil's Tower, that seems to contradict a well-established scientific idea, like fossilization, where do you point your skepticism? Do you question the wild interpretation of the evidence? Or do you start to question the fundamental theory itself? It's that classic battle between the scientific consensus and a really stubborn contradiction.